Check out this corner ruin that I've made. Quite nice. Not entirely spectacular. This not about what the ruin looks like necessarily, it's about how it was made. What if I was to tell you that I made this without measuring a single line? I barely even used a ruler at all. I've come up with a way of creating endless customization in terms of making modular ruins. Because normally what happens when you want to make a ruin or a building is you make lots of marks, you do lots of measuring, you do lots of eyeballing with stuff, particularly around corners, like you can see me doing around here. And it ends up looking fine. It ends up looking good enough, certainly, but it's incredibly time consuming, and there's a way in which it can be a lot better. And it occurred to me when I thought of this dwarven king's head that I engraved in my Barlin's tomb. I thought, what if you could do that but with brickwork instead? So, being the entirely sane person that I am, I set about opening up a CAD program and individually drawing dozens and dozens of elements, archways, windows, round windows, square windows, and all sorts to be used in exactly the same way that you've just seen me use the king's head, which I engraved. So basically, I've done all of the work for you if you want to proceed in this way. But what it means is that now that I've done that, I've got this whole file full of all these different elements in what I'm calling my good enough buildings medieval edition. There may be other editions depending on how well this one is received and how much I want to do other stuff, because it was an insane amount of work. So let me show you how simple it is once all that work was put in. So I decided on the size of the wall I wanted to do. I got a crenulation strip just to add a little bit of detail, and decided how high up that was going to be. Then I wanted to have a simple archway, and I wanted to have a simple doorway. So I got one of those, copied it, pasted it, dragged it into the position I liked, and then went and found an arched window, which was going to be suitable. So I chose this particular one here, and then again, paste it, and lo and behold, you have a wall template. Now, if you're doing both sides of a wall, you can then export this as a quick file. You can download that. You see what I'm doing here, and then you can drag that back into Canva, so you've got an exact replica of what you've just done. Make sure it's exactly the same size as the one you just made by just dragging the corners out like that. And then you can flip it horizontally, and there you've got the other side that you'll need to do. So all of that was done in less than 3 minutes, and you end up with something which you just simply print out, and it looks like that. So you print out one for one side and one for the other. Now this here is the only bit of measuring I did in the whole thing, and even this could be avoided if you wanted. But yes, the bit of foam that you're going to be scribing or scoring onto has to be the same size as the template that you've made. Other than that, it's incredibly simple. So from here, it's a bit like wrapping up a present if you're really bad at wrapping up presents. So just kind of folding it in the right way, making some cuts and things, but we want this wrapped up nice and tightly. So what I did was just fold in the right places, and then as I'm putting tape on to join it all together, I'm actually kind of pulling quite hard to get a good amount of tension on that, because we don't want this slipping around. I mean, I'm making it sound like this is difficult. It really, really isn't. And then once you've done that, just tidy it up a bit, and it couldn't be much simpler from there. Starting with a nice sharp knife, and all you're going to do is score the lines on. It's a pretty simple process. It takes a bit of time, but it takes so much less time than measuring everything out, and it looks so much better than if you do it yourself, probably. I don't know how good at scoring you are, but the way I've done this is I've started with the more intricate detail, like the window arch and the doorway arch, where there's curves and more intricate pieces, and then moved on to the crenellation strip, where you've got that kind of crisscross detail. But honestly, really, really not difficult at all. The other option, if you're not comfortable using a knife, is to use a pencil and just draw over the lines. I don't particularly like how this looks in comparison to cutting into it. I prefer to cut into it and then spread it out. Using a pencil afterwards, I think that you don't quite get the crispness that you're going to get with a knife. But no, I just want to make sure you're aware that this is an option that is available as well. But literally all you are going to be doing, if you decide to do this, is to just draw all over all of the lines. And if it is something that you want to do, I have made this exact template available for free on my Patreon, so you can go over and download that entirely for free. Now, with the brickwork, I decided to do the vertical lines first. I went through and did all of the vertical lines before moving on to the horizontal ones. And that's mainly to try and keep the structural integrity of the paper intact as I'm going along. Because I think if I went and did, one row of bricks at a time, I think the paper would slowly start to fall apart. Now, with the horizontal brickwork, you can use your ruler and just line this all up. The other option with all of this is to not even bother with any of the brickwork things and just use the modular elements and stick them to a bit of foam and then score them in place. That's another option as well, so that you don't have to think about scoring bricks. But, because honestly, that's the easy part, right? The archways and things is something else. And couldn't be much easier to get a result that looks like that. Some of the paper decides to adhere a little bit, but minute of tidying up just to kind of scrape that paper off, and you've got a perfectly decent looking wall piece with nice medieval style architecture. Now you're going to take the other side and put the mirrored image on. And this is only necessary if you're going to be seeing both sides. So I've gone through exactly the same thing of just wrapping it up like a badly wrapped present. And then both sides were done. From here, working on cutting out the archway and the doorway. So just making sure everything's nicely lined up. And I like to cut this out in sections so it can be kind of really, really detailed. So I'm being incredibly careful with keeping the knife nice and vertical, and making sure that all the cuts are nice and crisp. Having a nice sharp knife really, really helps this. So you can see that I'm just going to snap off the bottom section of the doorway. So not worrying about the archway at all initially, just the bottom part of it, and then cutting that into little segments. Anything to make it easier to access any more intricate areas, do that. There's no prizes for cutting it all out as one block. And even doing that, there's going to be a little bit of tidying up anyway. But again, that just took a couple of minutes, and then moving on to the even more fiddly window, which again, done in the same way. Cut out the bottom half of it first where it's all nice and square, and then moving on to the higher bit, which again, just working because you've got exactly the same image on both sides and it all lines up perfectly. You don't have to cut all the way through from one side. You can cut through halfway from one side and halfway from the other, which really helps when you're looking at the more intricate details. But that in itself is a perfectly good wall. Now I wanted to make this into a corner, so I did like a zigzag cut up the brickwork, which you'll see exactly what I mean in a second. Took a couple of minutes, and then you end up having two halves of the corner, and then you have this really satisfying folding moment where, there we go, come on. You fold it in half. I mean, you can just pull it apart, but satisfying just to fold it in half like that. Now, you could, if you wanted, keep these separate, and you could have a flat pack thing. That's something that I'm going to be doing some more work on probably in the future. But there you have a perfectly reasonable corner ruin, and you could do some more to that, or you can do what I did and paint it and stuff. But that is genuinely good enough for most tables. Now, to make it more detailed, I'm going to widen all of the brick lines by just going gently over them with a pencil. This takes a little bit of time, but it widens things out and makes them look a little bit more realistic in terms of, a little bit more eye-catching maybe. I think in terms of scale, it might be a bit wide, but when it's on a tabletop and it's a couple of meters away from your eyes, it is kind of nice to have these brick lines visible, even if they are slightly above what scale would be. Also going to be adding in some lines between the bricks on the inside of the window and the inside of the archway. But yeah, you can see the difference between the finished one and the unfinished one. Seeing as this is a ruin, it should probably be a little bit more ruined, and the very square vertical edges don't quite cut it. So in order to rectify that, I'm just going to cut off some random bricks. So just thinking about how it may have collapsed in some way or another. And also it's important, well, not necessarily important, but it's nice to keep these bricks to be used a little bit later on. So anything you cut out, do cut it out along the line so it can act as a fallen brick a little bit later on. You can cut along the crenellations so that you've got some angled things as well, and you can rough it up as much as you want to. I didn't go too mad on this. And from here, you can then add some further wear to all of the bricks by doing a tin foil roll. Now, I just want to say that when it comes to the kind of the teeth which are joining at the corners, don't press down too hard on these, otherwise they will look very weird at the corner part because they'll be flattened in places and there'll be gaps. So you can do this by pressing down not too hard at all, and it still creates a nice amount of indentations which can be used to make it look like it's more worn and torn. I don't think I've ever said wear and tear in the past tense before, but there you go, wear and tear, worn and torn. That was fun. And then again, it still slots together, back together nicely like that. Then I'm going to go for a base. Now for the base for this, I'm using some really thin cork board, which is really lightweight, really easy to work with, very easy to cut. So just thinking about roughly what kind of shape I want that to be. I wanted it to be a little bit random, so just random line and then cutting through this, which is really, really simple, just going through that with a craft knife. And just from here, the cut that I did ended up with quite a few, I don't know, not quite vertical looking lines, but some things which looks a little bit too unnatural. So just with the blade at a bit of an angle, just cut through those again, just to kind of round those off and make them look a little bit more natural. So it, will blend into the table a little bit more, and then just checking it actually does fit. Then I moved on to the painting stage of this, which is nice and simple. So it started by just splodging lots of black paint on and just using a cheap makeup brush just to get into all of the details. These are some mermaid makeup brushes, which makes the ruin extra magical. Oh, that's what I'm telling myself anyway. Once I'd allowed that to dry, it was a case of mixing up some grey paints, so it's a little bit lighter, and then I'm using a sponge here to apply that. Now, applying it with a sponge is nice and quick, but it also means that you get, not only does it not get into all of the details because of the tinfoil roll that you've done, but you also get the sponge pattern as well. So there's like a double layer to it. So you can see really, this is sped up a bit, obviously, but it's really, really quick to just paint the entire thing whilst making it look pretty decent. So yeah, it took a matter of minutes just to do both sides of that before allowing it to dry, and you'll see what that looks like in a minute up close at the camera. So you can see how all the details really kind of popping and showing already with very, very little effort. And then to finish off in terms of painting, I went for an even lighter grey. I used this tiny little bit of scrap of a sponge here and went over it again, concentrating a little bit more on areas that I thought might have shown a little bit more wear, but honestly, it doesn't matter too much, and it's an incredibly simple thing to do, an incredibly quick thing to do. I mean, the longest thing about this whole thing is how long it takes the paint to dry, but yeah, not it's by no means long, by no means complicated, and certainly quicker than trying to do it with a paintbrush, I think. I used a hot glue gun to stick it all down, so I chose to put the long side down first, so just a bit of glue along the bottom edge of each thing, making sure it was in a position that meant that the other part of it wasn't going to be off the edge. Held that down, and then I'm gluing the underside of each tooth. And then once I've put a little bit of glue on the underside of each tooth, putting a line of glue along the bottom, and then from there I'm putting a bit of glue on the inner edge of each tooth, so it's glued at every single tooth in two places, as well as being along the bottom. Nothing complicated about putting it together, just slotting it in. Some glue did squidge out as expected, but it's a very simple case of just kind of wiping it off. You can see my bald spot if you look carefully at this point. yeah, and then from there I took over the leftover bricks, which I'd done the same sort of painting work on, and just spent a few minutes just stacking these up. I put a few in the corner just to add a little bit of extra support to that joint. But yeah, in the main, just piled up some bricks and glued them down. We're on the final stretch here. So I got some wood glue, which was my preferred adhesive for putting flock down because it sticks very quickly and very firmly. So just covered that in glue, sprinkled this kind of rubbly, earthy flock type stuff all over the entirety of where I put glue. All looked a bit too neat, so I got a paintbrush and then just kind of jogged it around to show some wear and tear, I said wear and tear a lot in this video. Some places where it might have been walked over a little bit more, and you could call it finished from there, but I wanted to add a little bit more. So I wanted to add some vines as well, because I always feel like a ruin with some overgrown vines always looks good. So just place some glue over this corner, and then I did some on the other edge as well, but I've got these little vine things which work really, really well. Just kind of pulling them into lengths and then kind of put them all side by side and then trying to put them all, mostly trying to put them all down at once because these things just hook onto anything. So yeah, put them to the bottom, held it in place, and then just, you can see what I'm doing there, just kind of pulling it into position. And then with that held at one end, I'm then able to just kind of smear them down so that gets held into place nicely. And then you can add more and more on top. So it's as thick as you want it to be. And yeah, nice and simple to do, and it's like a really nice finishing touch. And also, if you haven't done that corner particularly well, or there's another part of it you haven't done very well, or you cut some way didn't want to cut, vines are a great way of covering up any bad work. And you can see finally I'm finishing up by putting some vines on the other thing there. So obviously, like I said, this is not particularly about this being the most beautiful corner ruin ever. It's a pretty decent looking corner ruin from my point of view. This is all about how easy it was to make and how easy it was to do all of the design, because, well, it will be for you if you decide to do it. If you want to go ahead with this, there is a what I'm calling the Good Enough Buildings Medieval Edition. There's 50 pages of elements. There's a drag and drop builder, which is incredibly easy to use. There's a full video tutorial on how to use that if you're not very tech savvy, but honestly, it couldn't be much easier. And that's available on my Patreon right now, patreon.com/goodenoughscenery. Or if you just like to make the ruin that I made, then that template is available for free over on Patreon as well. Anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed this. I really hope you're kind of inspired by the idea of making and designing your own ruins that are incredibly easy to build. And I'd love to see what you make. Catch you for another video soon.